The production of this video was made possible by donors to the Orchestration Online Patreon initiative. Please consider adding your support to the creation of free educational internet resources by visiting our Patreon page linked below.
Hey there, this is your orchestration tutor Thomas Goss, bringing you the first chapter in a new series of educational videos, Orchestration Masterclasses. Over the past few years, I've released several orchestration lectures that cover every single bar of different masterpieces, like The Rite of Spring and The Planets. While it's been exciting to explore these works with the Orchestration Online community, I feel that sometimes the mass of information can be overwhelming to the average composer. So I'd like to provide a balance with shorter, more focused videos that cover specific points about orchestration, and help you to grasp certain key aspects of style and approach from different great composers in the established repertoire. Since we're currently in the middle of an orchestration challenge using a piano piece by Manuel de Falla, I thought it might be great to start this series with a look at the last few pages of his score to Nights in the Gardens of Spain. Not that you have to imitate his exact technique or anything, but it may help you gain a deeper understanding of his artistic voice. Nights in the Gardens of Spain is one of those works that defies exact categorization. Its piano part sometimes functions as a well-defined solo voice, and at other times blends into the workings of the orchestra similar to its use by Russian and American composers of the first half of the 20th century. So it has less soloistic glue than a piano concerto, but more of a solo role for the pianist than strictly a keyboard section player. Some great concert pianists have toured it as a concerto, but even then, the impressionistic structure of the work undermines the piece as an ideal virtuoso warhorse. Solo passages inhabit the music from time to time as part of Falla's heavily perfumed, near hallucinatory tone painting, not in a specific sequence of progressively more showy episodes. Let's start from Rehearsal 43 of Movement 3. Here, the harmony has restabilized from the previous passage into a B major 6/4 chord. This moment of completion won't last long, as Falla is going to use the low F-sharp dominant note as a pedal point for the rest of the passage, over which he'll explore different harmonic directions in the string section's chord progressions. The scoring of that pedal is extremely delicate, double basses below on a long tie, and fourth horn an octave above, written pitches sounding up a perfect fourth in old bass clef horn notation. Note the momentary trade-off to second horn in the 6th to 8th bars, to give the fourth horn a couple of bars to rest and regroup. Low horns taking the octave with the double basses like this frees up the cellos for playing chorales with the rest of the string section. On the same pitch as those horns, we see a very rare example of timpani and harp unison that works very well, but only because the dynamic is extremely soft. The timpani plays a subdued but restless tattoo, with the harp doubling most of the same pitches alternating enharmonically between F sharp and G flat. The result is a distant, subtle thrumming. Let's take a very quick look at how that opening B major 6/4 chord is voiced in the brass and double basses. Before we go to the chart, observe how the double basses and trumpets are marked pianissimo diminuendo, while the horns are a touch less restrained at piano. In this chart, we can see why. Suppressing the tonic for the trumpets keeps the weight on the dominant, and helps the trumpets blend into the horns rather than forming a combined timbre. Trumpets plus first and second horns form a glowing B major octave chord above, with a third horn below brightening the glow by doubling the major third on D sharp. And of course, as we just mentioned, the fourth horn playing at the octave with the double basses. As I play back this bar for you now, notice as well the punctuation of the pizzicato strings and rolled piano. The meat of this passage is, of course, the muted string chorale, harmonizing the melody with mysterious, almost sinister chords. I feel that this is Falla reflecting the impressionistic instincts of his friend Debussy with his own very original voice. The motion is mostly parallel throughout, with Debussy cellos telescoping into the downbeat on the first two statements. Notice the discrete support of first and second horns from within, doubling the cellos and then rising inside the strings to double the second violins with the first horn, and cellos with the second horn. Properly balanced, the horns will simply warm up the harmony while blending in imperceptibly. From the end of the 8th bar of the passage, the doubling rises more to the surface, though notice that just as before, certain select pitches of the strings are being doubled, rather than every note. English horn will stand out most at the beginning, first doubling the violas and then swapping over to the cellos. The second horn will most likely submerge a bit into the string texture as it doubles the lower pitches of the second violins. But the first horn will tend to penetrate the sound picture as it enters to double the rising first violins. The English horn's final notes provide an echo as it doubles the cellos voice crossing the first violins. Let's listen to the full passage now. I'll throw in a few on-screen notes as we go to remind you of certain aspects of scoring we discussed. From Rehearsal 44, the piano makes its last solo entrance for the entire work. It'll return at the end of the movement, but as we'll see, that return will be more as an orchestral component than as a solo. This is one of the structurally most simple sections in the entire work, though Falla adds little touches to keep the listener intrigued. One of these is the ambiguity of tonality in the first 5 bars, suggesting F-sharp Phrygian, F-sharp Phrygian dominant with a raised third of A-sharp, and a further raised sixth on D-sharp. The harmony murkily shifts between these different elements before descending to E minor. A quick injection of A to set up the following D, a simple 5-1 progression, settling back on A, and then finally ending on a G6-3 chord that's further undercut by pizzicato F naturals in lower strings and rolled timpani. Throughout, the accompaniment maintains the stuttering bolero rhythm of the previous passage, starting with lower strings playing F-sharp octaves, adding the middle strings to play stacked E-fifths with some doubling from the lower heavy brass, which gives way to a simple low E-fifth from bassoons, then stacked D-fifths with the bassoons still tagging along. Note that the second violins jump up to repeated Ds as the first violins jump in to play marcato A-sixths, a very simple low double stop that doesn't need to be marked non-divisi, as it's so obvious to the average section player. Then stacked A-fifths in the entire string section, ending with the aforementioned G major 6-3 chord. Let's run through this section now with the music. We'll repeat this again in a few minutes, but for now, try to set aside the piano solo and the other thematic elements, and really just focus on the accompaniment as it murmurs along from below. Now for the thematic elements. Of course, the piano's thoughtful, improvisatory-sounding wanderings represent a beautifully scored solo. But to my mind, the simplicity of the octave phrasing reminds me of an orchestral kind of featured line, as much as a line from a piano concerto. As with the overall identity of the piano in this work, it's a little bit of both. Note the key role of the first horn, filling in the gap between the piano's first and second statements. Starting with a solo sounding middle C sharp, then rising to double pitches inside the falling violin chorale. Then the soft urgency of the first horn's countermelody toward the end of the passage, followed by a brusque double duet of all four horns. The real kicker, though, is the little sweep reacting to the piano's opening statement. It's a masterclass of its own in teaching that less is more. 8 instrumental groups are involved, but only 4 of them actually contribute to the upward motion of the sweep: the violas, harp, first clarinet, and flutes. Notice the care with which Falla balances the gesture, so that his softer middle register flutes won't get buried in the rush. As to the other instruments, timpani rolls on F sharp from pianissimo to a mere mezzo forte, doubled an octave higher by fourth horn sounding F sharp below middle C, before it jumps up to become part of the E minor 7th chord with the other horns. This chord is also punctuated by divisi pizzicato from the violins, the double and triple stops of which are very easy to play. Let's listen to this entire section again now, and this time mentally combine all the elements as they work together. As I mentioned before, it's a simply scored passage, but the individual touches that make it interesting are what matters to me as an orchestrator, especially in understanding Falla's style. The rest of the movement is pretty easily covered, as much Tutti scoring often can be. What's lovely here is how soft most of the large-scale textures are, and how much care Falla puts into them. Before the double bar, the violins play octaves, doubled by first oboe and English horn, which, as I've mentioned in other lectures and writings, is a lovely combination. Notice how the octave trumpets hang on to the A in the violin melody, and then pull away upwards, backing off beautifully into the subito piano that follows. The first bassoon helps to stabilize and mellow the timbre of the second trumpet. What follows is a great basic lesson in octave scoring. The melody plays in a triple octave, A2 flutes on top, first oboe and first violins in the middle, and first clarinet, English horn, first horn interweaving with second horn, and top divisi cellos on the bottom. The accompaniment is left to bassoons, the rest of the horns and strings, trumpets, and just a touch of tuba here and there. I love this little gesture on second violins, very easy to play with open D and A in the bottom arcing up to 2-fingered pitches above on C and A flat, and then back again. Speaking of special care, Falla reveals this in making sure the accompaniment clearly lifts at the end of each 2-bar phrase. Another triple octave follows, scored differently to sound even smoother and more cohesive. Piccolo and first violins on top, A2 oboes and clarinets doubling second violins in the middle, then English horn and bassoons doubling cellos on the bottom, with a touch of horn at the beginning. Accompaniment is nearly all in the brass, timpani rolls, and double basses. The brass will sound very full and warm here without overpowering the melody, even with the first horn going all the way up to a fortissimo high written A. I won't go into enormous detail for the last few bars, but I'll just point out a few fun things to watch out for. Like how beautifully the melody telescopes downward from there as the accompaniment drops away in the brass, until nearly all the strings are playing a unison. Then on the next screen, how the piano enters the music one last time, but really as a member of the orchestra more than a soloist, doubled by horns, lower strings, and eventually clarinets and timpani. This lovely voice crossing here, where the second violins and violas ascend above the first violins, doubling the cellos, to eventually hang on these diminished thirds an octave higher, and how that is doubled by oboes above and clarinets plus first and second horn below. How that same melodic gesture opens out into a triple octave going forward, and then a quadruple octave of solo strings doubled by piccolo, flute, English horn, and bassoon in that order, with the gli altri strings hanging on to A6ths. It's a beautiful, moon-soaked ending to a night of excitement and musical adventure. Let's have a listen to that whole ending section now, with a few notes on the score to remind you of the points I've covered. I'd love to add more videos to this Masterclass series in a few months, covering key passages of some of the great masterpieces of orchestration, similar to some of my lectures and lessons of the past, but shorter and more focused in on particular aspects of orchestration approach, and also using on-screen notes and Tutti chord charts to help out developing orchestrators. Let me know what you think of this format in the comments below, and whether you found this video helpful in your understanding of Falla's orchestration. See you soon.